The crowd at Willow Creek's bustling market parted like a river around a stone as Dahlia Wilson stumbled backward, one hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly while the other reached for anything to steady herself. A rough-looking trader had shoved past her without a second glance, leaving her teetering on the edge of balance. Just as she felt herself falling, a strong hand caught her arm, and another gently steadied her back. "Stand beside me," a deep voice said, pulling her upright with surprising gentleness. Dahlia looked up to find herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face beneath a worn Stetson hat. It was 1876 in the Montana Territory, and Dahlia Wilson was 5 months pregnant, alone, and 1,000 miles from anything she'd once called home. "Thank you, sir," she managed, her voice barely audible above the cacophony of the Saturday market. She straightened her simple calico dress, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "No need for thanks, madam. Some folks need to learn proper manners," the stranger replied, his eyes narrowing at the retreating figure who'd pushed her. "Name's Thomas Everett. Most folks just call me Tom." "Dahlia Wilson," she replied, finally catching her breath. "I appreciate the help, Mr. Everett," Tom nodded, his expression softening as he noticed her condition. "You shouldn't be out here alone in your state, Mrs. Wilson. These markets get rowdy, especially when the cattle drivers come through town." Dahlia's hand instinctively went to her wedding band, twisting it nervously. "I don't have much choice in the matter," she admitted, "and it's just Miss Wilson now," understanding flickered across Tom's features. In the West, a woman alone had few options, and a pregnant woman alone had even fewer. "Well, Miss Wilson, I'd be honored if you'd allow me to assist with your shopping today." He offered his arm, a gesture so gentlemanly it seemed out of place amid the dusty chaos of Willow Creek. No lady should have to battle this crowd by herself. Dahlia hesitated. She'd learned the hard way that kindness from strangers often came with expectations, but something in Tom's steady gaze made her reach for his offered arm. "I don't want to impose," she said carefully. "No imposition at all," Tom replied, adjusting his hat. "I came to town for supplies myself. Two can shop as easily as one." As they moved through the market together, Dahlia noticed how the crowd seemed to part for Tom. He wasn't particularly large, but something about his presence commanded respect. His clothes were simple, but well kept: a faded blue shirt under a leather vest, denim pants tucked into worn boots, and a gun belt that looked used but not showy. "You're new to Willow Creek," Tom observed as they stopped at a vegetable stand. "Arrived last month," Dahlia confirmed, carefully selecting potatoes that would keep. "I'm staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house until—" Her voice trailed off as her hand again moved protectively over her belly. Tom nodded, understanding the unspoken worry. "Mrs. Holloway is good people, fair prices, clean rooms." "Yes, she's been kind," Dahlia agreed, though she didn't mention how her savings were dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. "Do you live in town, Mr. Everett?" "Got a small ranch about 5 miles east," he replied, helping her bag the vegetables. "Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Built it up from nothing these past 8 years." As they continued through the market, Tom insisted on carrying her purchases, adding them to his own saddlebags. Dahlia learned he had come to Montana as a young man after the war, worked as a ranch hand until he saved enough for his own place, and now ran a modest cattle operation with just 2 hired hands. "And you, Miss Wilson, what brings you to this corner of creation?" he asked as they stopped for her to examine a bolt of fabric. Dahlia's fingers traced the simple cotton, calculating if she could afford enough for baby clothes. "I was headed to Oregon," she said carefully. "My cousin lives there, but travel proved more difficult than expected in my condition." Tom didn't press further, and Dahlia was grateful. The full story of her husband Matthew's death from fever back in Missouri, of selling everything to escape the creditors who appeared like vultures afterward, of the stagecoach accident that had forced her to stop in Willow Creek, was too much to share with a stranger, no matter how kind. "Sometimes where we end up isn't where we aim to go," Tom said simply, "but it might be where we're meant to be all the same." By the time they finished shopping, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the main street. Tom's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, stood patiently at the hitching post. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Everett," Dahlia said, gathering her smaller parcels while Tom secured the heavier items in his saddlebags. "It was my pleasure, Miss Wilson." He hesitated, then added, "I could escort you back to Mrs. Holloway's if you don't mind the company." The walk to the boarding house took only 10 minutes, but Dahlia found herself slowing her pace, strangely reluctant for their time together to end. Tom matched her unhurried steps, talking easily about the town and its people. He had a way of speaking that put her at ease, straightforward but thoughtful, without the boastful swagger so many Western men affected. At the boarding house steps, Dahlia turned to thank him again, suddenly shy. "You've been very kind to a stranger, Mr. Everett. Folks help each other out here," he replied, removing his hat. "It's how we survive." He handed her the last of her parcels, his fingers briefly brushing hers. "Miss Wilson, I ride into town most Saturdays for supplies. If you ever need assistance again, I'd be glad to help." The offer hung between them, simple yet somehow significant. Dahlia found herself nodding. "Thank you, perhaps I will." As she watched him ride away, Dahlia felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a small spark of hope. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. "Well, little one," she whispered, "we've made at least one friend in this town." The following Saturday, Dahlia found herself looking for Tom in the market. She told herself it was merely practical. A pregnant woman could use help carrying packages, but she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt when she spotted his chestnut horse tied outside the general store. This time, their meeting seemed less like chance and more like an unspoken appointment. Tom greeted her with a warm smile that transformed his weathered face, and Dahlia was surprised at how easily conversation flowed between them. They spoke of practical matters, the coming winter, the preparations she was making for the baby, the improvements Tom was adding to his ranch house. "I've taken a position helping Mrs. Holloway with the cooking and cleaning," Dahlia told him as they examined a display of preserved fruits. "It's not much, but it covers my room and board." "Smart thinking," Tom approved. "Mrs. Holloway's cooking could use some improvement, if you don't mind my saying so." Dahlia laughed, a sound that surprised her own ears. "I've already started adjusting her recipes." The other boarders seem appreciative. As October turned to November, their Saturday meetings became a ritual. Tom would help with her errands, then walk her back to the boarding house, their conversations growing deeper with each encounter. Dahlia learned about his family back east, parents long dead, a sister in Boston he rarely saw, and he came to understand the tragedy that had sent her westward. "Matthew was a dreamer," she explained one crisp afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the Mercantile. "Always planning our fortune, always certain the next venture would be the one. He wasn't a bad man, just restless." "And you?" Tom asked. "Were you a dreamer too?" Dahlia considered this, watching fallen leaves skitter across the street. "I suppose I was practical enough for both of us." "Someone had to be," she sighed. "But I loved him for his dreams, even when they didn't pan out. When the fever took him, I thought I'd die too." Tom's hand moved as if to cover hers, then retreated. "Grief has its own time," he said quietly. "No rushing it." On the first Saturday in December, Tom didn't appear at their usual time. Dahlia waited at the general store, watching the street with growing concern as snow began to fall. By noon, she had resigned herself to completing her errands alone, telling herself it was foolish to be disappointed. "Miss Wilson," the call came just as she was preparing to return to the boarding house. Tom rode up, his horse's flanks lathered despite the cold. "I apologize for my tardiness. One of my hands broke his leg and I couldn't leave until the doctor arrived." Relief washed over her, followed by a realization that made her pause. She had missed him, truly missed him, in a way that went beyond mere convenience. "Is your man all right?" she asked, watching as Tom dismounted, moving with a slight stiffness she hadn't noticed before. "Doc Miller says he'll mend, though he'll be laid up through winter." Tom removed his gloves, revealing reddened knuckles. "Makes for a tight situation with just two of us to manage everything." "You're hurt," Dahlia observed, noting how he favored his right side. Tom shook his head. "Just sore. Horse spooked during the commotion, and I took a tumble. Nothing broken." But as they walked through town, Dahlia could see pain in the tightness around his eyes. When a particularly fierce gust of wind made him wince, she made a decision. "Mr. Everett, Tom, please come back to the boarding house with me. Let me at least fix you something hot to drink before you ride home in this weather." He looked about to refuse, then nodded. "That's mighty kind. Truth be told, I could use a moment by a warm fire, Mrs. Holloway raised her eyebrows when Dahlia brought Tom into the kitchen, but made no comment beyond a polite greeting. In the 6 weeks since their first meeting, Dahlia had never invited him inside, maintaining the propriety expected of a woman in her situation. As Tom sat at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched against his discomfort, Dahlia heated water for coffee and assembled a plate of biscuits from that morning's baking. Working in the kitchen, in this small domestic scene with Tom, felt strangely natural. "Your hands need tending," she said, placing the coffee before him and pulling up a chair. Without waiting for permission, she took his rough palm in hers, examining the scraped knuckles and small cuts. "It's nothing," he began, but fell silent when she gave him a stern look. "I've spent most of my life patching up men too stubborn to admit when they're hurt," she said, rising to gather medical supplies from a nearby cabinet. "My father was a carpenter, always coming home with some injury he claimed was just a scratch." Tom submitted to her ministrations with surprising docility, watching as she cleaned his wounds with carbolic solution, then applied salve with gentle fingers. "You have a healer's touch," he said quietly. "Just practice," she replied, though she felt warm at the compliment. Matthew was forever injuring himself on some project or other. When she had finished with his hands, she hesitated, then asked, "Where else are you hurt? And don't tell me nowhere I can see it plain as day when you move." For a moment, Tom looked as though he might deny it, then sighed. "Ribs are sore, landed against a fence post." "Let me see," Dahlia said, then blushed at her own boldness. "I mean, it's all right," Tom assured her. "I trust your judgment." He unbuttoned his vest and shirt just enough to reveal a purpling bruise spreading across his right side. Dahlia examined it with clinical detachment, though her heart raced at this unexpected intimacy. "Bruised, not broken, I think," she pronounced, grateful her voice remained steady. "But you'll need to wrap them for support, especially if you're working short-handed." As she helped him bind his ribs with strips of clean cloth, Dahlia became acutely aware of his closeness, of the lean strength beneath her fingertips, of his scent leather and pine and clean sweat. When she finished, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. "Thank you," Tom said, his voice rougher than usual. He rebuttoned his shirt, breaking the moment. "You'll make a fine mother with such caring hands." The mention of motherhood brought Dahlia back to reality. She was 7 months pregnant with another man's child, a widow still wearing her wedding band. Whatever she felt stirring for Thomas Everett had no place in her life. "You should rest before riding home," she said, moving away to wash her hands. "The storm's getting worse." Tom stayed for another hour, talking with Dahlia in the kitchen while the snow piled up outside. When he finally rose to leave, Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Everett, I cannot in good conscience let you ride out in this blizzard," the older woman declared. "We have an empty room and your horse can stay in the small stable out back." Tom looked out the window at the whiteout conditions and nodded. "That's very generous, Mrs. Holloway. I'd be grateful to accept." That evening, with Tom just down the hall in the guest room, Dahlia found sleep elusive. The baby kicked restlessly as if sharing her agitation. She placed both hands on her rounded belly, feeling the strong movements beneath. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the darkness. "Your father's been gone less than a year, and here I am." She couldn't even complete the thought. What was she doing? Developing feelings for a man she barely knew, planning a future that included him somehow. The storm raged for 2 days, keeping Tom at the boarding house. During that time, Dahlia observed him with the other boarder's 2 elderly sisters, a young schoolteacher and a clerk from the bank. Tom was unfailingly polite, helping with chores without being asked, entertaining everyone with stories of ranch life that made even the prim schoolteacher laugh. On the morning of the third day, the storm cleared, leaving Willow Creek buried under 3 feet of snow. Tom prepared to depart after breakfast, concerned about his ranch and the injured hand he'd left behind. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mrs. Holloway," he said, settling his bill at the front desk. "Miss Wilson, thank you again for your nursing skills. My ribs feel much improved." Dahlia walked with him to the stable where a ranch hand had brought his freshly groomed horse. In the bright winter sunlight, with snow glittering around them, Tom looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Dahlia," he said, the first time he'd used her given name, "I'd like to call on you properly, if you'd permit it." The directness of his request left no room for misunderstanding. He wasn't offering friendship or assistance, he was declaring an interest that went beyond neighborly kindness. "Tom, Dahlia gestured helplessly at her condition. "I'm not in a position to, I know your situation," he interrupted gently. "I know you're still grieving, still finding your way. I'm not asking for promises, just permission to see you, to get to know you better. The rest can sort itself out in time." His honesty disarmed her. "People will talk," she warned. Tom smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "People always talk. It's about the only entertainment in these small towns during winter." Despite herself, Dahlia laughed. "Very well, Mr. Everett, you may call on me, though I can't imagine what Mrs. Holloway will say." "She already gave me her blessing," Tom admitted. "I asked her yesterday, wanted to do things proper-like." This revelation stunned Dahlia. The older woman had said nothing to her, though she had given Dahlia several thoughtful looks over the past 2 days. As Tom mounted his horse, he looked down at her with a warmth that melted the last of her resistance. "I'll be back on Saturday, weather permitting." "I'll look forward to it," Dahlia replied, surprised to find she meant it wholeheartedly. True to his word, Tom appeared the following Saturday, despite roads still treacherous with ice and snow. He brought small gifts, a jar of honey from his own hives, a handmade wooden rattle for the baby, and most precious of all, a letter from Dahlia's cousin in Oregon that he'd collected from the post office. "Emily writes that she's still expecting me in the spring," Dahlia told him after reading the letter. They sat in Mrs. Holloway's parlor, the proprietress discreetly busy in another room. "She and her husband have room for me and the baby." Tom's expression remained neutral, though his hands tightened slightly on his hat. "Oregon's a fine place from what I hear, good farmland." "Yes," Dahlia agreed, though the prospect suddenly seemed less appealing than it had months ago. "But I've been thinking. The journey would be difficult with a newborn. Perhaps it would be wiser to wait until summer when the passes are clear." Hope flickered in Tom's eyes. "That sounds sensible. Winter travel is hard enough for able-bodied men, let alone a mother with a young baby." The weeks leading up to Christmas saw Tom at the boarding house regularly, no longer waiting for market days. He brought Dahlia news of the town, books borrowed from the schoolteacher, and once, a sprig of holly he'd found on his property. They talked for hours about books they'd read, places they'd seen, the future they each imagined. "I never thought I'd marry," Tom confessed one evening as they sat by the parlor fire. "Spent too many years building my place, getting it just so. Seemed easier to stay on my own. And now?" Dahlia asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Tom's gaze met her steadily. "Now I find myself thinking a house isn't much of a home without the right people in it." Christmas Eve brought a party at the boarding house, with all the residents and several townspeople gathering for music and food. Dahlia, now 8 months along and moving awkwardly, had spent the day baking pies and cookies. When Tom arrived, bearing gifts wrapped in brown paper, her heart lifted at the sight of him. "You've outdone yourself," he said, surveying the laden table. "The whole town will be talking about Mrs. Holloway's Christmas feast, though I suspect you're the one who deserves the credit." Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Tom drew Dahlia aside. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small package. "A Christmas gift." Inside, nestled in a handkerchief, was a silver locket on a delicate chain. It was simple but beautiful, clearly chosen with care. "Tom, I can't accept this," Dahlia protested, though her fingers traced the engraved pattern reverently. "Please," he said. "It was my mother's. I've kept it all these years waiting for the right person to give it to." The significance of the gift, a family heirloom, was not lost on Dahlia. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." "May I?" Tom asked, taking the necklace. When she nodded, he stepped behind her, gently placing it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin as he fastened the clasp, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. When he came around to face her, his expression was tender yet uncertain. "Dahlia," he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. She waited, heart pounding, aware they stood beneath a sprig of mistletoe Mrs. Holloway had hung in the doorway. Tom noticed it too, his gaze flickering upward briefly. "I don't want to presume," he said softly. Dahlia made her decision in that moment. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Merry Christmas, Thomas Everett," she whispered. The joy that transformed his face was worth any risk to her reputation. He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that spoke volumes. "Merry Christmas, Dahlia Wilson." 2 days after Christmas, in the pre-dawn hours, Dahlia woke to sharp pains that told her the baby was coming a month earlier than expected. Mrs. Holloway sent the young bank clerk racing through town for the doctor, while the schoolteacher heated water and gathered clean linens. "Should we send for Mr. Everett?" Mrs. Holloway asked as she helped Dahlia back to bed after a particularly difficult contraction. Dahlia shook her head, gritting her teeth against the pain. "No, it's too far and the roads." Another contraction cut off her words. "But Mrs. Holloway had already made up her mind. When the doctor arrived, he found the elderly landlady giving instructions to a second messenger. "Ride to the Everett Ranch," she was saying. "Tell Mr. Everett that Miss Wilson's time has come." The labor progressed slowly throughout the day. By dusk, Dahlia was exhausted, her strength flagging. The doctor looked increasingly concerned, exchanging worried glances with Mrs. Holloway over Dahlia's head. "The baby's turned wrong," he finally admitted to Dahlia. "I may need to intervene if things don't progress soon." Dahlia, drifting in and out of awareness between contractions, barely registered his words. She had retreated into herself, focusing only on breathing through each wave of pain. Somewhere in the haze, she thought she heard Tom's voice, but dismissed it as wishful thinking. Then suddenly he was there, kneeling beside her bed, his face lined with worry as he took her hand. "I'm here, Dahlia," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I'm right here with you." "Tom," she whispered, wondering if she was dreaming. "You shouldn't. It's not proper." "Hang propriety," he replied fiercely. "I'm not leaving you." His presence gave her renewed strength. When the doctor instructed her to push, Tom supported her shoulders, murmuring encouragement with each effort. After what seemed like hours but was perhaps only minutes, a thin cry pierced the room. "A girl," the doctor announced, quickly wrapping the tiny infant, small but strong. They placed the baby in Dahlia's arms, a red-faced, dark-haired little girl with her father's chin and her mother's determined expression. Overwhelmed, Dahlia looked up at Tom, who was watching them both with undisguised tenderness. "She's beautiful," he said, voice rough with emotion. Just like her mother. In that moment, exhausted and vulnerable, Dahlia made no attempt to hide her feelings. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I needed you here." Tom's hand stroked her hair back from her damp forehead. "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away." Dahlia named her daughter Eleanor Grace Wilson, after her own mother. For the first week of Eleanor's life, Tom visited daily, bringing supplies, checking on both mother and child, and helping with any tasks Mrs. Holloway would allow a man to handle in a house of women. On the 8th day, as January snow fell softly outside, Tom arrived with a small wooden cradle he had crafted himself. "I thought the little one might need her own place to sleep," he said as he set it up beside Dahlia's bed. "It's beautiful," Dahlia marveled, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You made this," Tom nodded, a hint of pride in his smile. "Been working on it since Christmas. Had it almost finished when the messenger arrived saying you were in labor." Dahlia placed Eleanor in the cradle, watching as the baby settled contentedly onto the small mattress Mrs. Holloway had sewn. When she looked up, Tom was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Dahlia," he said, taking her hands in his, "I know it's soon. I know you're still healing, still adjusting to motherhood, but I can't wait any longer to speak what's in my heart." She felt tears spring to her eyes, knowing what was coming but scarcely daring to believe it. "I love you," Tom said simply. "I think I've loved you since that first day in the market when you stood so brave and alone. I love your strength, your kindness, your practical mind, and I already love this little girl as if she were my own." He knelt beside the bed, still holding her hands. "I'm asking if you'll consider becoming my wife. Not right away, I know you need time, but someday when you're ready." Dahlia's tears spilled over. "Tom, are you certain? Taking on another man's child, a widow with nothing to her name, you have everything to your name," he interrupted. "Courage, wisdom, a loving heart, those are worth more than gold to me." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not trying to replace Alina's father, but I would be honored to help raise her, to be there for both of you for all the days to come." Dahlia looked from Tom to her sleeping daughter and back again. She thought of the months of loneliness after Matthew's death, the fear that had been her constant companion on the journey west, and the unexpected happiness she had found in this small Montana town. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength with the word. "Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Everett, not someday as soon as Alina and I are strong enough to make the journey to your ranch." The joy that lit Tom's face was worth any uncertainty, any whispers that might follow their hasty engagement. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing each one reverently. "I promise you won't regret it," he said. "I'll spend every day making sure of that." Mrs. Holloway, unsurprisingly, took the news of their engagement with calm acceptance. "I saw it coming the day he helped you in the market," she told Dahlia. "Some things are just meant to be." The townspeople were less restrained in their reactions. Some praised Tom for his honorable intentions toward a woman in Dahlia's situation, while others whispered behind their hands about the hasty arrangement. The Reverend's wife made a point of asking Dahlia if she was certain about marrying so soon after becoming a mother. "With all due respect, Mrs. Bennett," Dahlia replied, steel in her voice, "I've spent enough time alone to know when I've found a good man. I don't intend to let him go because of someone else's sense of proper timing." Tom, for his part, seemed impervious to the gossip. He focused entirely on preparing his ranch for a wife and infant, hiring a local woman to give the house a thorough cleaning and ordering furniture and supplies from as far away as Denver. "The place isn't fancy," he warned Dahlia during one of his visits. "Just 4 rooms and a lean-to kitchen. But the roof doesn't leak and there's room to expand come spring." "It sounds perfect," Dahlia assured him. "All Alina and I need is a warm place to call home." By early February, Dahlia had recovered enough from childbirth to consider the move to Tom's ranch. Alina was thriving, gaining weight, and already showing signs of her mother's determined personality. "Are you certain you're ready?" Mrs. Holloway asked as she helped Dahlia pack her few belongings. "There's no shame in waiting until spring." "I'm ready," Dahlia confirmed. "Besides, we're not rushing into anything. Tom's fixed up the second bedroom for me and Alina. We won't be sharing quarters until after the wedding." This arrangement had been Tom's suggestion, a concession to propriety that would allow Dahlia time to adjust to life on the ranch before they formally wed. The Reverend had agreed to perform the ceremony in late March, giving the community time to accept the match. On a clear, cold morning, Tom arrived with a wagon lined with blankets and hot bricks for the journey. Mrs. Holloway fussed over Alina, making sure the infant was bundled securely against the winter air, while the other boarders helped load Dahlia's trunks. "You've given me so much more than room and board," Dahlia told Mrs. Holloway as they embraced goodbye. "You've given me a fresh start, a chance to find happiness again." The older woman patted her cheek affectionately. "You've earned every bit of happiness coming to you, my dear. Now go make that ranch into a proper home." The 5-mile journey to the Everett Ranch took nearly 2 hours on the snow-packed roads. Tom drove carefully, checking frequently to ensure Dahlia and Alina were warm enough under their blankets. As they crested the final hill, he pointed ahead to a sturdy log house nestled against a stand of pines, smoke curling from its chimney. "Home," he said simply. Dahlia took in the scene: the well-built house with its stone foundation, the barn and corrals beyond, cattle dotting the snow-covered pasture in the distance. It wasn't grand or fancy, but she could see the care that had gone into every part of it. "It's lovely," she said, meaning it completely. Tom's ranch hands Daniel, a taciturn man in his 40s, and young Caleb, barely 20, had prepared for their arrival. The house was warm, a stew simmered on the stove, and a vase of dried wildflowers sat on the table in welcome. "Don't you two worry about the evening chores," Daniel told Tom. "We'll handle everything tonight. You just get the ladies settled in." As promised, Tom had prepared a bedroom for Dahlia and Alina, with the cradle placed near a small window. He had even hung curtains slightly crooked but clearly chosen with care to match the quilt on the bed. "I hope it's comfortable enough," he said, watching anxiously as Dahlia explored the room. "Mrs. Peterson from town helped with the woman's touches. I wouldn't know a dust ruffle from a doily." Dahlia smiled, deeply touched by his efforts. "It's perfect, Tom, truly." That first evening in their new home, after Alina had been fed and settled in her cradle, Dahlia and Tom sat before the fire in the main room. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow against the windows, but inside all was warm and peaceful. "Happy?" Tom asked, reaching across to take her hand. Dahlia nodded, suddenly too full of emotion to speak. A year ago, she had been a grieving widow facing an uncertain future. Now she sat beside a man she loved, her daughter sleeping safely nearby in a home where she was wanted and cherished. "I never expected this," she finally managed. "After Matthew died, I thought that part of my life was over." "Life has a way of surprising us," Tom replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Good and bad." As the weeks passed, Dahlia settled into ranch life with surprising ease. She had always been practical and hardworking, skills that served her well in her new environment. By day, she cared for Alina, cooked for the small household, and gradually put her touch on the home's interior. In the evenings, she and Tom would sit by the fire, talking about their days and making plans for the future. "I'd like to plant a vegetable garden come spring," she told him one night, "and perhaps some flowers along the front path." "Whatever you want," Tom agreed readily. This place could use a woman's touch. Been too long with just us men tramping around. As March approached, bringing the occasional hint of warmer weather, preparations for their wedding began in earnest. The ceremony would be small, just the Reverend Mrs. Holloway, the ranch hands, and a few friends from town. Dahlia found herself looking forward to it with growing excitement, her initial concerns about marrying so soon after becoming a mother fading in the face of their daily happiness. One afternoon, while Alina napped and Tom was out checking the herd, Dahlia found herself exploring the storage room off the kitchen. Among the supplies and tools, she discovered a small trunk pushed against the wall. Curious, she opened it to find a collection of items carefully preserved: a woman's hairbrush, a faded daguerreotype of a young couple, several books, and at the bottom, a wedding dress wrapped in muslin. Dahlia was carefully refolding the dress when Tom returned, stamping snow from his boots in the kitchen. "I found this," she said when he appeared in the doorway, holding up the dress. "I'm sorry if I was prying." Tom's expression softened. "You weren't prying, those were my mother's things. I've kept them all these years, though I'm not rightly sure why." Dahlia returned the dress to its wrapping. "She must have been special, your mother." "She was," Tom agreed, kneeling beside the trunk. "Died when I was 15. My father followed her a year later, just lost the will to go on, I think." He picked up the daguerreotype, showing it to Dahlia. "Their wedding day, father was 30, mother just 19. Dahlia studied the solemn faces in the image, seeing echoes of Tom in both his parents: his father's strong jaw, his mother's expressive eyes. "They look happy, despite the serious expressions." "They were," Tom confirmed. "Had their struggles like anyone, but they loved each other true." He carefully returned the picture to the trunk. "I always hoped to find what they had." The unspoken question hung in the air: had he found it with her? Dahlia reached for his hand, meeting his gaze steadily. I think you have, she said softly, and so have I. Tom's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a testament to the feelings that had grown between them over the past months. When they parted, his eyes were bright with emotion. I've been meaning to ask, he said. Would you like to use my mother's wedding dress? It might need some altering, but… Dahlia's heart swelled at the offer. I'd be honored, Tom, truly honored. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, one of those early spring days that hints at the warmth to come. Mrs. Holloway arrived early to help Dahlia prepare, bringing with her a small bouquet of the first wildflowers and greenhouse blooms from town. You make a beautiful bride, the older woman declared as she pinned the last curl into place. And Thomas Everett is a fortunate man. Tom's mother's dress had needed only minor adjustments to fit Dahlia's figure, still fuller than usual from childbirth. The ivory silk was yellowed with age but still elegant, with delicate embroidery along the bodice and sleeves. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Eleanor, dressed in a gown Dahlia had made from the same fabric as her own wedding handkerchief, slept peacefully in Mrs. Holloway's arms throughout. The Reverend spoke of new beginnings and second chances, words that resonated deeply with both bride and groom. When it came time for vows, Tom took Dahlia's hands in his voice steady and sure. I, Thomas James Everett, take you, Dahlia Rose Wilson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love and cherish you all the days of my life, to be a father to Eleanor, and to build a home filled with joy and peace. Where you go, I will go. Your family shall be my family. This I vow before God and these witnesses. Dahlia, fighting tears, responded with her own promises. I, Dahlia Rose Wilson, take you, Thomas James Everett, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love and honor you all the days of my life, to make our house a home, and to walk beside you in all seasons. Your joys shall be my joys, your sorrows my sorrows. This I vow before God and these witnesses. By the authority vested in me, the Reverend concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Tom's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from Daniel and Caleb. As they turned to face their small gathering of witnesses, Dahlia felt a sense of rightness of coming home at last. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, a meal prepared by Mrs. Holloway and the ranch hands, a small cake from the town bakery, and much laughter and conversation around the newly expanded dining table Tom had built for the occasion. As the sun began to set, their guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone with Eleanor. Tom built up the fire while Dahlia nursed the baby, the domestic scene feeling both familiar and wonderfully new. Mrs. Everett, Tom said when she returned from settling Eleanor in her cradle, I do believe this is our first moment alone as husband and wife. Dahlia smiled, letting herself be drawn into his embrace. Indeed it is, Mr. Everett. Their kiss deepened, months of restrained desire finally finding expression. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tom rested his forehead against hers. I want you to know, he said softly, that I'll never rush you. We have all the time in the world. Dahlia's hands framed his face, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. I don't want to wait, she whispered. I've found my heart's home, Thomas. I'm ready to truly be your wife. Later, as moonlight spilled across their bed, Dahlia lay in the circle of Tom's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, a coyote called lonesome across the valley, but inside all was warmth and contentment. Happy. Tom murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Completely, she replied, pressing a kiss to his skin. Are you? His arms tightened around her, more than I ever thought possible. Spring brought new life to the Everett Ranch, calves in the pastures, wildflowers along the creek, and vegetables sprouting in Dahlia's newly tilled garden. Eleanor grew rapidly, her dark eyes taking in the world with increasing alertness, her tiny hands reaching for everything within grasp. Dahlia wrote to her cousin in Oregon, explaining her change of plans. I have found happiness where I least expected it, she concluded the letter. I hope you will come visit us someday to meet Tom and see Eleanor as she grows. The reply, when it came, was full of congratulations and promises to visit when travel was easier. "Sometimes fate takes us on detours for good reason," Emily wrote. "I'm so glad yours led you to joy." As summer approached, Tom began expanding the house, adding a proper kitchen and a third bedroom. "For the future," he explained when Dahlia questioned the need. "God willing, Alina might have brothers or sisters someday." The idea filled Dahlia with quiet joy. She had always wanted a large family, a dream that had seemed lost after Matthew's death. Now, watching Tom with Alina the way he carried her on his shoulders around the ranch, telling her the names of plants and animals, singing off key lullabies when she was fussy, Dahlia knew he would be a wonderful father to however many children they might be blessed with. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alina asleep in Dahlia's arms, Tom turned to his wife with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, "about that day we met. If that fellow hadn't shoved past you at the market, if I hadn't been there at that exact moment, we might never have met," Dahlia finished for him. Tom nodded, taking her free hand in his. "Makes a man believe in Providence." Dahlia smiled, remembering her fear and uncertainty that day, how a simple act of kindness had changed the course of her life. "Do you know what I thought when you said stand beside me?" "What's that?" "I thought it was just a polite offer of assistance," she admitted. "I never imagined you meant it literally, that one day I would truly stand beside you as your wife." Tom's smile warmed his entire face. "Maybe I didn't know it then, but some part of me recognized you right away, the missing piece I'd been waiting for." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they sat in companionable silence. Three souls brought together by chance, choice, and perhaps a touch of destiny. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning, Dahlia stood at the kitchen window, watching snow drift down onto the expanded yard. The Christmas tree Tom and Caleb had brought in from the hills stood in the corner, festooned with paper chains and small carved ornaments Tom had made during the long evenings. Alina, now a year old and taking her first tottering steps, played on a quilt nearby, babbling happily to herself. She had Tom's eyes, Dahlia had decided, though her dark hair and determined chin came from her birth father. "Look at the snow, Alina," Dahlia called, lifting the child to see outside. "Your first real Christmas snow." The little girl pressed her hands against the glass, entranced by the falling flakes. "Dada," she asked, her favorite and so far only clear word. "He'll be back soon," Dahlia assured her. "Gone to town for supplies." As if summoned by their conversation, Tom appeared in the yard, driving the wagon through the newly fallen snow. Alina squealed with delight, recognizing him even at a distance. Dahlia bundled the child into her coat and carried her onto the porch to greet her husband. Tom's face lit up at the sight of them, as it did every time he returned home. "My girls," he called, jumping down from the wagon, "the two prettiest sights in all of Montana Territory." He swept Alina into his arms, spinning her until she giggled, then leaned in to kiss Dahlia soundly. "And how are you feeling today, Mrs. Everett?" "Better," Dahlia replied. "The morning sickness seems to be passing." Tom's hand rested gently on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. Their second child, first together, was due in early summer, a fact that filled them both with quiet joy. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "An early Christmas gift." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Dahlia found a silver charm, a tiny baby shoe to hang alongside the locket he had given her that first Christmas. "Oh, Tom," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes, "it's perfect." "I thought we might start a tradition," he explained, bouncing Alina on his hip. "A charm for each child to keep close to your heart." Dahlia leaned into his embrace, overwhelmed by the fullness of her life. "I love you, Thomas Everett," she said, "more than I could ever say." "And I love you, Dahlia Everett," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You and our children, born and unborn, are the greatest gifts I could ever receive." As they stood together in the gently falling snow, Dahlia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance meeting in a crowded market to a family bound by love rather than blood, each step had led them home to each other. Elena reached out, placing one tiny hand on her mother's cheek and the other on her father's, as if to connect them physically the way love had connected their hearts. Tom laughed, the sound rich and warm in the winter air. "Smart girl," he said, kissing the child's forehead. "She knows what matters most." Dahlia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had lost so much, traveled so far, faced such uncertainty. Yet here she stood, surrounded by love, with a future stretching bright before her. As they turned to go inside, the first Christmas lights began to twinkle in the early dusk, promising warmth and celebration. Tom's arm tightened around her waist, a silent affirmation of all they had found together. "Stand beside me," he whispered, echoing those first words that had changed everything. "Always," Dahlia replied, and together they stepped across the threshold into their home and their shared tomorrow.